We live in a world where we chase connection, but sometimes we chase the people least capable of giving it to us. You fall for someone who pulled you in just enough to keep you wanting more. They gave you crumbs and you thought it was a feast because it felt like something real, but then they disappeared. Cold, distant, gone. And now you're here wondering, do avoidants ever come back? Here's the truth. Not unless you make them, not through manipulation, not through begging, not through losing yourself trying to win them over. No, you make them come back by becoming the kind of person they can no longer control. You make them come back by doing the one thing they didn't expect. You stop waiting. Avoidants are addicted to space, to mystery, to the illusion of freedom that lets them avoid the intimacy they fear. But they are also deeply drawn to confidence, to boundaries, to people who don't collapse when left behind. So when you finally stop chasing them, when you heal, when you move forward with your life, they notice. They wonder why they no longer have a hold on you. And that's when something shifts. You see, avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing their power over you. So the moment you reclaim it, the moment you stop making them the center of your emotional universe, you become a person they don't recognize. You become magnetic because you no longer need them to validate your worth. Let's be clear. This isn't a game. This is growth. This is you refusing to live on emotional breadcrumbs. You're not trying to get them back. You're becoming the version of yourself that no longer settles for half love. Avoidants will circle back, but only when they sense your energy has shifted from chasing them to choosing yourself. And by the time they return, you might realize, wait, you don't even want them anymore, because you'll have built something so much stronger within self-respect, clarity, and the courage to wait for someone who chooses you from day one, not someone who has to lose you to wake up. So no, avoidants don't come back unless you make them, by outgrowing the part of you that needed to be chosen by someone emotionally unavailable. Avoidants leave not because you weren't enough, but because intimacy triggers fear in them. This is one of the hardest truths to accept when someone you cared about withdraws from the connection. You start internalizing their absence, measuring your worth through their detachment. You replay conversations, question every move, and wonder what you did wrong. But what you don't realize is that the battle wasn't with you. It was with themselves. You were simply the mirror that reflected everything they weren't ready to face. People with avoidant attachment styles carry an invisible weight. Somewhere along their emotional timeline, they learned that closeness comes with danger. That vulnerability leads to pain. That love, while desirable, is something to be feared. So even when they crave connection, they have an unconscious reflex to protect themselves the moment they feel it getting too real. They see love as both a gift and a threat. And when you begin to offer your heart in a sincere, open way, it activates their defense systems. They may not even understand what's happening, but they start pulling back, not because you're wrong for them, but because you're too right, too present, too close. When they leave, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. But avoidants are not rejecting you. They are rejecting the emotions they don't know how to handle. They feel safe when things are on their terms. When there's emotional distance, unpredictability, or control. The moment they sense they are being seen too clearly or loved too deeply, they panic. That kind of intimacy exposes their wounds, their insecurities, their fears of being consumed or abandoned. And rather than stay and work through it, they flee. Disappearing feels easier than opening up. You could be everything they ever said they wanted, and still they will run. Because what they say they want and what they're capable of accepting are two different things. You can pour love into them, offer patience, empathy, consistency, and instead of appreciation, you get distance. Not because you failed, but because they are not emotionally available enough to receive what you're offering. This is why relationships with avoidants often feel like a cycle of hot and cold. They show up just enough to give you hope, then vanish when you get too close. It's not about you. It's about the unresolved fears they carry. When they start to feel love growing, it stirs up the very thing they're trying to avoid: emotional dependency, vulnerability, and the terrifying possibility of loss. So instead of leaning in, they sabotage, they ghost, they pick fights, they withdraw into silence, all as a way to protect themselves from pain that hasn't even happened yet. If you don't understand this dynamic, you start blaming yourself. You think if you had just done one thing differently, they would have stayed. But their leaving was never about your worth. It was about their fear. Their emotional world is built around a survival mechanism that tells them closeness equals danger. And until they confront that, they'll keep running from the very thing they long for most. You can't fix that fear for them. You can't love someone into healing if they aren't ready to face their shadows. The only thing you can do is recognize that their withdrawal is a reflection of their internal struggle, not a reflection of your value. They leave not because you're too much, but because for them, love feels too intense. And rather than rise to meet that intensity, they choose escape. Understanding this doesn't make the pain go away, but it gives it clarity. It helps you stop internalizing someone else's fear as your failure. And it gives you permission to stop trying to prove yourself to someone who was never rejecting you. They were rejecting the vulnerability you represented. Chasing someone who is avoidant only reinforces their need for distance. It may feel counterintuitive at first because everything in you wants to close the space between you and the person who has pulled away. You want to send the message that you're still there, that you care, that you're willing to make things work. But what you're really doing, without realizing it, is confirming the very fear they have about being smothered, controlled, or losing their independence. Avoidants are wired to associate closeness with the threat of losing themselves, and the more you pursue them when they pull back, the more they retreat. This isn't because you're wrong for wanting connection. It's because their threshold for intimacy is extremely low. The moment they sense emotional pressure, they subconsciously equate it to danger. Even if you're approaching them with warmth and understanding, their internal system interprets it as something they need to escape. To them, your efforts feel like a demand rather than a desire. So the harder you try to fix it, talk it out, or pull them closer, the more you're pushing them into survival mode. And when someone is in survival mode, they don't connect, they protect. It's a dynamic that leaves you feeling helpless. You want to show them that you're safe, that your love isn't a threat. But what they need isn't convincing. What they need is space. Ironically, the one thing that feels unbearable to give when you're the one left behind. When someone avoids intimacy, they don't need more of you chasing after them. They need to experience what it feels like when you stop. Not as punishment, but as protection for your own peace. When you chase someone who is emotionally unavailable, you're placing yourself in a loop of anxiety. Every message you send, every attempt to reconnect becomes another notch in their emotional wall. You're trying to solve a problem they're not ready to face, and you become the easy scapegoat for their discomfort. Your pursuit becomes their excuse to pull further away. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because their emotional world can't hold space for the depth you're offering. The turning point only comes when you stop trying to manage their response and start managing your own. Instead of trying to soothe their fears with constant reassurance, you step back and give them the space to confront themselves. That's when something shifts. When an avoidant sees that you're not fighting to stay in their life at any cost, it disrupts their pattern. They're used to people trying to earn their love. They're used to being chased. So when you don't do that, when you pull your energy back, they notice. You create contrast. Suddenly, you're not predictable. You're not feeding their need for emotional control. And without that control, they begin to wonder. Not just about you, but about why they keep pushing away the very thing they say they want. But that only happens when you let the silence do the talking. When you stop showing up in ways that reinforce their emotional avoidance. When you stop pouring energy into someone who isn't meeting you halfway. This isn't about playing hard to get. This is about refusing to lose yourself, trying to hold on to someone who doesn't have the capacity to be held. You're not abandoning them, you're respecting yourself. And in doing that, you allow them the rare opportunity to reflect. You give them space not only to miss you, but to question why they keep running. But that realization can't happen while you're still running after them. When you chase, you lose. Not because you're unworthy, but because you're giving all your energy to someone who isn't ready to receive it. And the only way to break that cycle is to stop giving them what their fear depends on, your pursuit. Reclaiming your power is the only way to disrupt the emotional control they once had. When someone with an avoidant attachment style pulls away, they're not just creating distance, they're creating a dynamic. Whether consciously or not, they begin to control the emotional temperature of the connection. Their silence makes you talk more. Their distance makes you move closer. Their withdrawal makes you question, analyze, and chase. In this dynamic, you're no longer on equal ground. You're reacting while they dictate the rhythm of the relationship. And the longer this goes on, the more you lose touch with your own power, your own needs, your own worth. The emotional control they hold isn't always manipulative in intent. It's just a result of their emotional conditioning, but it is real. And the moment you start defining your behavior based on what they might say or do next, you've already given them the upper hand. You start walking on eggshells, trying not to push them further away. You suppress your feelings just to maintain the connection. You begin to believe that the only way to keep them around is to abandon parts of yourself. And that is where the erosion of self begins. The most radical shift happens not when you get them to come closer, but when you take your focus off them entirely and put it back on yourself. This is how you reclaim your power, not by convincing them to love you, but by deciding to love yourself enough to stop waiting for breadcrumbs. It begins with the smallest acts, saying no to things that don't feel good, not responding to mixed signals, pulling your energy away from situations that leave you feeling small. Every time you resist the urge to chase, you're breaking the pattern. Every time you choose silence over pleading, you're taking your power back. This isn't about ego or revenge. It's not about making them feel what you felt. It's about stepping out of a dynamic that never served you in the first place. Because real power doesn't come from controlling someone else. It comes from knowing you don't have to. It comes from understanding that you don't need someone's attention or validation to be worthy. And it's that energy, calm, grounded, unshaken, that completely disorients an avoidant. They're used to the power play. They're used to being chased, but they're not used to someone who can detach with dignity. When you reclaim your power, something inside you stabilizes. You're no longer triggered by their silence because you realize it's not your responsibility to break it. You're no longer waiting for a message that may never come because your life is full of things that nourish you. You don't need closure from them because you've given it to yourself. That kind of emotional clarity sends a powerful message, not just to them, but to yourself. I don't need to shrink to be loved. Disrupting their emotional control means removing the reaction they rely on. If their distance no longer makes you chase, if their silence no longer makes you spiral, the old dynamic begins to dissolve. Suddenly, they're not the one in control. You are. And in that space, they're forced to confront themselves. They have to sit with their own discomfort without the distraction of your energy trying to soothe them. But more importantly, you're no longer living in a space of emotional survival. You're living in self-respect, and that is the true disruption. That is the kind of shift that not only breaks the unhealthy bond, but sets a new standard for what you'll accept going forward. Because once you taste your own power, you won't settle for anything that asks you to give it up again. Growth, not games, is what changes the dynamic. They come back when you truly move on. It's one of the hardest truths to accept because most people in the midst of heartbreak are looking for strategies to win someone back. They want to know what to say, how to act, what to post, or how long to wait. But the reality is, avoidants don't return because you played the game right. They come back when something in you shifts so deeply that you're no longer anchored to the outcome of their return. That shift isn't about pretending to move on. It's about actually doing the work to become someone who no longer needs the validation of someone who couldn't choose you in the first place. Games might get their attention, but they won't change the dynamic. You can ignore their texts to make them curious. You can post a perfectly curated life online to spark jealousy, but all of that still stems from the same emotional place. You're still performing for their approval. You're still trying to elicit a reaction instead of creating authentic transformation. And avoidants can smell inauthenticity. If they feel like your distance is a tactic, it won't make them feel safe. It'll make them retreat even more. Because deep down, what they fear most is being emotionally manipulated. They want to be with someone who is emotionally self-sufficient, not someone who's playing tug of war with connection. Growth looks entirely different. Growth means you're not just putting space between you and them. You're filling that space with healing, with awareness, with self-respect. It means that instead of waiting for them to come back, you're building a life where their return is no longer necessary for your happiness. It's not about shutting down emotionally. It's about redirecting your energy inward, asking yourself the hard questions and making choices that honor your needs. Why were you attracted to someone who couldn't meet you emotionally? What patterns in your past made this dynamic feel familiar or even comfortable? What are the things you neglected in yourself while trying to hold on to someone else? When you begin to answer those questions, your energy starts to change. You're no longer seeking closure from them because you've given it to yourself. You're no longer stuck in limbo because you've chosen to move forward. And that kind of energy is powerful. It's rare. It's the energy of someone who is no longer afraid to be alone. Someone who knows their worth, not because someone else confirmed it, but because they reclaimed it through self-awareness and growth. That's when the avoidant begins to notice. Not always consciously and not always quickly, but they feel the shift. The emotional grip they once had begins to loosen. They sense your detachment not as a tactic, but as truth. And in that truth, something unsettles them. Because the one thing they counted on, your emotional availability, your effort, your pursuit, is gone. Now they are left to face the silence. And it's in that silence that their curiosity grows. It's not about missing the attention. It's about missing the connection, the stability, the love that once held space for them. But by then, you're not waiting. You're not counting days or analyzing signs. You're not playing chess with their heart. You're simply living. And in that living, you become magnetic. Not because you want them back, but because you've become someone who no longer needs them. And ironically, that's when they're most likely to return, not to the version of you that was waiting, but to the version that outgrew the waiting entirely. Because that's the moment they realize that if they want to be part of your life again, they have to rise, not retreat. And only real growth, not games, can bring them to that place. By the time they return, you may have already outgrown the need for their validation. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins in the quiet moments, when the silence between you and them stops feeling like punishment and starts to feel like peace. When you begin to breathe again without waiting for a notification or a message. When the ache of their absence is still there, but it no longer controls your every thought. Slowly, steadily, something begins to shift inside of you. The pedestal you once put them on starts to crumble. The fantasy fades, and in its place, you begin to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what you hoped it would become. At first, you held on because their attention felt like proof of your worth. You believed that if they came back, it would mean you mattered, that you were lovable, that you were finally chosen. But healing has a way of rewriting that story. As you begin to pour energy back into yourself, the need for them to validate you begins to dissolve. You stop asking why they left and start asking why you waited. You stop craving their affection and start craving your own peace. And that, more than anything, is the sign that you're rising. Avoidants tend to return when they sense emotional safety. That safety often looks like you not needing them anymore. It's in your tone, your detachment, your ability to go on with your life without looking over your shoulder. They may reach out, test the waters, try to reinsert themselves into your world. But this time, you're not the same. You're no longer reacting with desperation or hope. You're not trying to decode every word or guess their intentions. Instead, you observe, you evaluate, you ask yourself, does this version of me even align with who they are anymore? This is what growth does. It shifts the balance. Not to punish them, not to make them feel inferior, but because you've stopped needing someone who didn't know how to hold you. You've learned to hold yourself. You've created stability in places they used to destabilize. You've built an identity outside of the relationship. And now their return doesn't feel like salvation. It feels like a choice. A choice you now have the power to make. You may feel gratitude for what they taught you. You may even feel compassion for their struggle. But the H that once demanded their presence no longer exists. What once felt like an unfinished chapter now reads like a completed story. Their validation no longer carries the weight it once did. Because you've realized that needing someone to prove your worth is a sign that you haven't fully claimed it for yourself. But now you have. Sometimes they come back because they miss the comfort of your love. Other times they return out of curiosity or loneliness or regret. But what matters most is not why they come back. It's who you've become in their absence. That version of you, the one who waited, who longed, who doubted, is gone. Replaced by someone who no longer chases, no longer settles, no longer defines themselves through the eyes of someone emotionally unavailable. It's not that you've stopped loving them. It's that you've started loving yourself more. So when they show up, your heart is no longer starving for their crumbs. It's full of clarity, boundaries, and self-respect. And with that fullness, you can finally see the relationship for what it was, a lesson, not a destination, a chapter, not the whole book. By the time they return, you're standing in a place they never imagined you'd reach, whole, grounded, and no longer needing their presence to feel complete. And that's the moment you truly understand what healing means, not getting them back, but getting yourself back. So in the end, it's never really about whether an avoidant comes back. It's about whether you come back to yourself. You spent so much time hoping they'd change, praying they'd see your worth, waiting for the moment they'd realize what they lost. But what you didn't see was that the most powerful moment wasn't when they returned. It was when you did. When you stopped needing someone who couldn't love you properly. When you chose healing over hoping. When you turned away from crumbs and decided you'd rather be hungry for a while than keep feeding on half love. If they come back, let them find a version of you that no longer needs their validation. Let them see what strength looks like. Quiet, grounded, unapologetic. Let them see what self-worth looks like when it's no longer trying to prove itself. And if they don't come back, let that be the final confirmation that you were never supposed to keep waiting in the first place. Because real love doesn't make you chase it. It doesn't punish you for wanting closeness. It doesn't disappear when things get real. Real love stays. And until that love finds you, may you stay with you. May you become the safe space you were looking for in them. And may you never again settle for someone who needs to lose you to recognize your value. Thank you so much for being here, for showing up not just to listen, but to grow. Remember, your healing isn't just a response to heartbreak. It's a declaration of your worth. And if no one told you today you are enough exactly as you are, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and keep choosing the version of you that doesn't beg to be chosen. Until next time, be strong, stay grounded, and thank you for listening.